Major Spoilers podcast covers news, reviews, and of course, spoilers, and goes into details about the topics discussed. So if you haven't read, listened, or watched the items we talk about, you might want to come back later.
I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven, and you're listening to the Major Spoilers podcast, the podcast for pop culture and comic fan.
In this issue, we talk the talk, we walk the walk, but I limp a little because of a high school sports injury. SilverHawks are go! Charles Xavier has a secret, and we get your view on what we did last time. MSP is the code name for Major Spoilers' daring, highly trained, special missions fat guys what read comics. Its purpose? To know you love comics, because we do too. And to fight boredom, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world, or at least bug the heck out of you. And it's on the air.
Welcome to issue 1111 of the Major Spoilers podcast. Thank you for downloading and checking us out this week. Matthew,
it's issue 2.
So have you ever been in the situation where you grew up watching something so often that you've got it memorized in your head, but because technology changes, when you watch the thing now in 4K digital, it's like a whole new experience?
Oh, yes. That's the way my brain works.
Yeah, no, so I sat down today, or not today, a couple of days ago, and I was like, you know what? I've been doing this kind of 80s marathon of, and I think Tremors is probably a 90s movie, but, you know, I did Tremors, I did Big Trouble in Little China, and I'm like, you know what movie I haven't seen in a long time, but I know it by heart? Buckaroo Banzai, Across the Eighth Dimension. And when I watched it as a kid, it was a VHS copy from HBO with the scan lines that'll, you know, run through it, or the tape getting damaged or whatever. And so you visualize that movie in that VHS quality that I remembered as a kid. And I'm watching this in 4K and I'm just like, wow, this looks great.
Right.
And it's just really weird to have that, because I know I've watched it since it's been out in digital and 4K, but you know, it's been long enough that my brain is still locked into, you know, 1985, 1986, watching this thing and saying, nope, that's VHS forever. That's the way I'm always going to remember it. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you are looking for a great weekend of movies to watch, I would highly recommend the trilogy of Big Trouble in Little China, Tremors, and Buckaroo Banzai.
I don't know. That's a lot of awesome.
It is. That's why I'm saying it's this great movie trio that will keep you entertained.
I have that problem all the time, but I have it in kind of a weird way, because I think it's IFC lately has been airing Gilligan's Island reruns, remastered and cleaned up.
Oh, yeah, where they've up-resed them.
I grew up on Gilligan's Island, but here's the thing. They've also edited them. So there are bits missing. Yeah. Do you remember the episode where
where Gilligan gets hit on the head with a coconut?
No. The mosquitoes come to the island, and they're clearly a mockery of the Beatles. And they're like Bingo, Bango, Bongo, and Irving. And so to get the mosquitoes to leave, the female castaways start a band called the Honeybees to try and convince them that they need to go back to civilization. And it ends up backfiring because the mosquitoes are like, these girls are too good. But the original show had a long singing sequence where Natalie Schaefer has a whole verse. My brain remembers that verse. It's not in the version that I've been watching. So my brain knows that there's more to this show, but they cut it out. I don't know if they cut it for time or what. But yeah,
is IFC a commercial? Is IFC a commercial station?
Yes, IFC is the independent film channel. So they will
run commercials,
air films,
or do they run films unedited?
Both.
Huh. Okay. That's weird that they would edit Gilligan's Island.
It's very strange. Yeah, IFC will air films with the original dialogue, so you can hear an F-bomb. IFC played Late Night with the Devil.
Yeah, that's a great
that has several. It has several F-bombs in the show. Oh, right.
He'll be on. He's offered to come on before, but listeners, I would suggest you listen to the Major Spoilers podcast pre-show for the reason why he hasn't been on the show. But I think maybe I'll reach out to him and say, hey, you know, you said that you wanted to come on and talk the midnight. What the heck is the comic book that he does at Dark Horse, the so-and-so
Um,
monster. It's straight up the, Channel 41 Monster Midnight Madness or whatever it is.
mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna have to reach out to him.
I'm trying to remember now what it is because it's got like a really great name.
David
I don't remember. His
Dastmalchian.
name is David Dastmalchian, I believe.
Yeah, that's
And sadly, I've noticed this. He was in everything because he showed up in Ant-Man,
Mhm.
and then he was on TV's The Flash,
Yeah, he's
and
also in the
then he
movie
was
Dune.
Polka Dot.
He's also in the movie
Really?
Dune. Yeah,
He was apparently in The Dark Knight.
yeah. He's all over the
And
place. This guy
I
is
didn't.
like, he's like that guy that's hiding in the corner. Like when I found out he was in Dune, I watched the scene again. I was like, oh yeah, that is him. And so, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm sure we would have a
That's
lot to
kinda
talk
cool.
about, but specifically, I would
And
want to talk to
he's
him
from over the park.
about growing. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Growing up in Kansas City and watching Up All Night
Channel,
and how that
with
influenced him.
Uncle Ed.
You don't say his name.
Oh, sorry.
Anyway, hey, listen,
With Uncle-
speaking of interviews, last week we had Kyle Higgins on the show talking about the upcoming relaunch. Well, not the relaunch, but the new issue of Radiant
Mhm.
Black that is coming up in March. And I've read it and it's great. He sent me a copy just the other day and said, here, read this. And I was like, okay, cool. And it's funny and it's scary and it's reflective of today's times. I think everybody's going to really enjoy it. So if you haven't had a chance to go and listen to the interview from last week's Major Spoilers podcast, I would suggest you do it because there's been a lot of positive feedback. Matthew, what are people saying about the interview with Kyle Higgins?
So Mark Smith, on the internet, he's known as Mark Smith, says, fantastic interview, especially having the extra full-length interview. If you can do this again, Stephen, please do.
And he's talking about the extra length interview is the Patreon exclusive, where there's another 45 minutes of interview that you can't hear anywhere else. And it's great. It is a great interview. So I would, thank you, Mark Smith.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. You know, that Patreon stuff. I hear that's really good.
Yeah.
Megatron Stu says, loved the episode today. The interview with Kyle Higgins was all caps great. I haven't yet listened to the unedited version, but I'm looking forward to it. And Lagnus, or as I like to pronounce him, Lazand, did go and pick up the next volume of Radiant back at once after the interview. Have not listened to the long one yet. That is most likely a weekend project, but I'm looking forward to it. So everybody is saying that the interview that aired in the podcast is making them want to go check out the additional material at the Major Spoilers Patreon.
Yeah. Patreon.com/Major Spoilers. It's a full hour and a half long interview, unedited. Well, there's a slight interview because we had a little technical snafu. But other than that, we talk about his time in college. We talk about how his college thesis film is what led to Howl and Radiant Black and the whole Massiverse. So people are going to want to go and check that out. So yeah, go and check that out today. And if you've got other thoughts on the show, by all means, head over to our Discord server where you can share your thoughts about everything that's going on in the world of Major Spoilers or movies or TV or video games or whatever it is that interests you. There's a sports ball channel in case you're interested in that. A lot of people seem to be poo-pooing on the Chiefs this year. But if you think the Chiefs are great, get into that sports ball channel and talk your heart out. Let's do some reviews.
All right.
Last week, so this is an interesting story. I think this is a one shot, right? X-Men Xavier's Secret. This is after the fall of Krakoa and after all of this stuff. Apparently, Charles Xavier is on the run, Matthew.
He is actually at this point he is imprisoned.
Okay.
Basically, Krakoa was attacked by Orcus, which was an anti-mutant organization, but they had control of Tony Stark's Iron Man technology and created Stark Sentinels.
Yeah.
Cyclops managed to defeat the Sentinels partly by having his wife reclaim the power of the Phoenix. At which point she then was able to do a little bit of a thingama. Maybe Krakoa's dead, maybe it's not. So this story actually picks up with Charles Xavier in prison. And the prison is in the Xavier School in Westchester. So it's actually kind of evil, honestly, on the part of the government. But the story begins with Scott and Jean, who are married but have been separated because she's flying through space, being all Phoenixy. Apparently, now when you're the Phoenix, you have Phoenix jobs. So she has been hanging out with Nova. I know.
The universe called and said, all you remote workers have to come back into the office. And Jean Grey is just like, gee, Merry Christmas.
I know. And the office is like the Andromeda Galaxy. So Phoenix is out in the Andromeda Galaxy, blah, 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 fish cakes. And Cyclops is running his own X-Men team back on Earth. So, it makes for one of those long distance relationships. But while all that is going on, do you remember the first superhero Civil War?
Oh, yeah. 1885, I believe. The North versus the South.
No,
that's Civil War. Okay. Iron Man versus everybody.
There's
Iron Man and his attitude
where,
versus Captain America and his righteousness.
Right. Captain America goes to prison, and this woman named Sally Floyd comes in and goes, "Oh, what do you know about the real person? When's the last time you watched NASCAR?
Yeah, when was the last time you were relevant?" Yeah, I remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
So Sally Floyd has been kicking around the Marvel Universe for either 20 years or however long it's been since Civil War. So probably, I don't know, week and a half. But Sally Floyd actually manages to get into some serious deep dish nonsense, wherein she discovers what happened to Charles Xavier. And Charles Xavier, of course, is trapped in his own home, but because he's the world's greatest telepath, and this is creepy. I've always said that this is creepy and it's awful and it's bad. And it's hard to write telepaths without having telepaths be like crazy evil. But apparently, for the last however many years of the Marvel Universe, Charles has been secretly placing psychic compulsions in the minds of Reed Richards and Tony Stark and the whole.
Just when you think Charles Xavier is a good guy, it turns out he's like a horrible piece of poop.
Well, if you ever have to put Charles Xavier in prison, says his secret trigger, make sure that it's not complete imprisonment and that his mind has a little tiny crack that it can slide out. So Sally Floyd, is investigating all of this nonsense, and she is really falling down a rabbit hole. And it's a dangerous rabbit hole because if Xavier's secret comes out, then the hatred that people have for mutants in the Marvel Universe right now is pretty palpable. It is huge.
Yeah.
But, if everybody knew all the stuff, it would be very bad. And of course, Sally Floyd, being a contrarian D-bag kinetic freako, is just like, oh man, there's no way I'm going to be able to forget this. Can you make me forget this? And she's
like, telling this to Charles Xavier?
Yeah. Okay. Charles Xavier manages to telekinetically or telepathically contact her. And she's like, I'm just going to keep digging at this until the secret comes out. You need to wipe my brain.
Because she knows the impact that it'll have on the world.
Well, I mean, I think what she really wants is to see NASCAR for the first time or maybe go to a Buc-ee's. I don't know, whatever it is she thinks Americans are about. But the issue is interesting because it puts that moral dilemma in the hands of a character who the issue explicitly tells us deals with these moral dilemmas in a relatively immoral way. And so you have to ask yourself, Xavier's secret, are we referring to the secret that is revealed, or are we referring to the secret that isn't revealed? All in all, I don't want to give it all away because it really does have a pretty solid ending. It has like a moment where you're just like, bam, that's like that last guitar riff at the end of the Phineas and Ferb theme song. Bam! It has one of those. 4 slices of meatloaf for X-Men Xavier's Secret #1.
Man, I'm going to have to read this.
Drawn by Diogenes Nivese. It is really interesting. It's really good stuff.
I'm trying to read every comic that is released in 2025. I'm about 2 weeks behind just because there is so much. Like Mad Cave Studios this week has like 10 comics out. But I'm trying to get into the X-Men. We'll be talking about the X-Men universe Later this year, I think we're doing. I know we're doing the Peach Momoka X-Men series for sure. And then we're doing X-Men volumes. Yeah, I think we're doing the main X-Men book as well. So we're doing Ultimate X-Men in a couple of weeks. And then it looks like X-Men Volume 7, the current run, July 1st. And the way you describe this, Charles Xavier kind of comes off. It sounds like he's kind of
a tremendous D-bag.
I don't want to say scuzzy, but kind of scuzzy.
Yeah, and it is difficult because as we have aged, I think that zeitgeist that we talk about, the old zeitgeist, has aged as well. And so, you know how I complain Nick Fury is now always evil. And the reason for that is because nobody trusts spies anymore. Spies are scuzzballs. Otter said to me, nobody trusts spies because spies are liars for money. And that is a whole thing. But nobody trusts telepaths because the expectation now is that telepathy is an evil power.
Yeah.
If you have the ability to control someone else's mind or read their mind, you can do incredibly immoral things. And it's a fair cop. You have to look at this and say, from this issue alone, you can be like, his point is there.
Well, but see, it seems like, okay, so the way that the solicitation reads, they discover a hidden mystery that threatens to pull Jean and Cyclops apart, which seems to imply something from Xavier's past. And I think that that's kind of weird because it's like, oh, I've always looked at Charles Xavier as somebody that is trying to champion the mutants and the human relationship, and can't we all get along? And if we come to find out that he's been doing this kind of stuff all along, it kind of negates his whole purpose.
It is.
Guess
difficult.
I'm going to have to read it. I'm going to have to read it, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to read it too, there is a link to our Amazon affiliate link right there in the show notes. A couple of pennies come back our way, but it allows us to do this thing a little bit longer. So X-Men Xavier's Secret out last week. I think I was too old, or I had aged out by the time the SilverHawks were on television, or our independent television stations in the area didn't have enough money. They were like, listen, we can afford He-Man and She-Ra, but we cannot afford the SilverHawks. So I don't know.
SilverHawks was 86, so we may have been too old.
Definitely by 86. I would have had it. Well, I don't know. I was reading comic books when I was, 16. So, but for whatever reason, I don't remember the SilverHawks being on my TV channel. They may have been, but maybe I was doing other things in the afternoon. Certainly athletics in the afternoon when I was in high school. But SilverHawks have been resurrected over at Dynamite Entertainment. And I will say that this book is 80s to the core. Grumpy old man Silverhawk talking about his retirement and having to come out of retirement to hunt down Mon Star. Just the evil destruction. There's another one that's in here that is a bad guy everybody would know. But everybody is coming out of retirement. We are the young. We are the old, Silverhawks. How are we going to be able to carry on and bring Mon Star to justice after a decade? And the answer is, hey, we're going to bring in some young'uns, and the old'uns and the young'uns are going to team up. But the way that they recruit the young'uns in this is somewhat problematic because one of the police forces is taken out in a raid gone wrong. And when they wake up, at least the one who's the leader of the team is like, what has happened to me? And everyone's like, welcome to the SilverHawks. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a little bit interesting. Maybe in the future, when you sign up to become a policeman, you sign over your life to this. So I think that is interesting. Of course, I'm familiar with the name Mon Star and the fact that he is the bad guy in SilverHawks. He does break out of jail, and it is interesting. But I will say that this comic book is 80s to the core. It just feels like every Lethal Weapon movie, every grimdark Blade Runner tale that is running rampant in the 80s. and that is the SilverHawks in one volume. I found it fascinating. I found it interesting. I also found that it's probably not for me, but that's okay. It's still competently written by Ed Brisson, George Cambadeas. His art is really good, although I have to go. I'm not a fan of the really thin inking that's done on here because it feels like it's an attempt to make the comic book page look like an animation page or a cell from an animation. And I really wasn't a fan of that personally. But I think if you are a SilverHawks fan and you're like, it's been 30 years since I've heard that name. It's also been 30 years for these for the SilverHawks. And now it's time for you to jump back on board and take that evil Mon Star down. SilverHawks #1. It's out this week from Dynamite Entertainment. 3 slices of meatloaf for me. Again, if you want to pick it up digitally or if you want to pick up the physical comic because you don't have one in your area, link in the show notes to our Amazon affiliate page. You're a fan of the SilverHawks, right? Or were you aged out of them as well by the time they were released?
I don't think I was aged out because I was, in '86, I was still watching Transformers and things. I just don't know that SilverHawks really made it all the way to
I don't think it
Midwest.
made to the interior of the United States. I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember seeing episodes of what's the cowboy one that Rodrigo loves?
Wild West Cowboys of Moo Mesa.
Is that the one? No, it's the one with it's the one where they're the sheriffs. Brave Star. I remember Brave Star, and I remember seeing like an episode or 2 of that, and I was just like, that doesn't seem to be something I'm interested in. But it was on TV. Of course, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were all over at the time. That was on Channel 69 in the mornings. And then I remember He-Man. I remember She-Ra. I remember G.I. Joe on TV. Of course, Battle of the Planets. But SilverHawks, I do not remember SilverHawks at all. I mean, I've seen clips here and there in more modern times, thanks to the magic of the YouTubes, but don't remember it as a kid.
Well, sometimes your hawks ain't made of silver. You're just like, I don't even know what a silver hawk looks like. But I also, it's one of those things that much like, I feel like SilverHawks and Thundercats were for
I remember,
grades below us.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know if that was like intentional or if it just sort of happened, but yeah. I like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know there's a guy in there called Hotwing.
So here we have Quicksilver, Bluegrass, Hotwing, Steelwill, Steelheart, and the Copper Kid are all in this issue.
Steelwill and Steelheart are either siblings or a couple. I can't remember. They may be siblings. And then like Quicksilver is the cool leader guy, and the Copper Kid is the little coppery guy who has like T-Up from Battle of the Planets. I think he has a weird speech pattern.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm interested. I mean, I'm interested in this enough to see where it goes and if it has enough legs to continue like Thundercats, because these two seem to be, sister shows, not by the same company or anything like that. Maybe they are. But it just feels like if you were a Thundercats person, you were probably watching SilverHawks at the same time. So Thundercats continues to go and appears to be doing very well at Dynamite. So I'm interested to see if SilverHawks has that same staying power. I'm interested to see if nostalgia has that same grip for the comic book readers. I hope it does. I hope it succeeds. I want everybody to succeed. So dear listener, if you have thoughts about the SilverHawks, or if you have thoughts about Charles Xavier manipulating your mind, then head over to the Major Spoilers Discord server. You can join it for free. Jump into the Major Spoilers channel, the podcast channel, or maybe even in the comic book channel, and tell us what you think about the SilverHawks. Maybe even jump into the TV channel to talk about SilverHawks or X-Men or whatever that you have. There's just a general topic. There's a general topic channel for you if you just want to go in and talk about crazy stuff that's going on in your life. There's a meme channel that you can go in and share crazy memes. It's all going on. There's some awesome people. I say that people don't believe me when I say that there are awesome people hanging out in our Discord, and they are some of the nicest, kindest, gentlest people in the entire world. Now, if you excuse me, I've got to go play some cards and oil my gun. That's a reference to a movie, people. Calm down.
Because you're so mean to me, and I'm clearly delightful.
I'm never mean.
So,
never, ever.
Oh, okay.
Never.
Yeah, sure.
No.
I'm with you. Yeah, whatever.
You know who else I want to send a big thank you out to?
Who dat?
To all of our patrons who support the show and make it happen. A couple of big thank yous going out this week. First of all, a big thank you to Hannah. Hannah upped her pledge. Hannah Jones upped her pledge, became a producer level patron. She talks about it a little bit over on our Discord server. So thank you very much for that, Hannah. We appreciate you. Also, a big thank you goes out to Pete. Pete rejoined, and this may be something very important for people to pay attention to. Hey, Stephen, I'm trying to catch up on all of my podcasts, so I'm not sure when you said this or on which show, but I heard you mention some dropped patronage. Yes, we have had some dropped patronage in the last couple of months. I didn't realize it until this past week, but for some reason, Patreon cut me off from all of my patronage. ? Basically, it looked like I canceled everything and or had invalid payment methods or something. Neither are true. And I think I do remember something about a screw up with Patreon when they were moving from a per creation show to a month-to-month show. And if you were doing per creation on other shows like Justin Robert Young's Politics, or even on Diamond Club, Night Attack, Brian Brushwood, that kind of stuff, that may have also impacted your other stuff as well. So Pete goes on to say, I re-upped with the various Frog Pants podcasts, and I'm fixing to do the same with you and the Major Spoilers podcast, which he did. So thank you, Pete. I don't know if this was an isolated incident related to me or whether it potentially happened to other subscribers. So other subscribers, if you thought you were a patron and suddenly you're like, I haven't heard the Major Spoilers podcast pre-show in quite an age, you might want to go and double check and make sure your credit card is valid or those kinds of things. So thank you for that, Pete. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know what happened. And perhaps your subscriber count may not reflect the actual number. Maybe worth mentioning on the show. Thank you. You demand Pete in NC, which I assume means code for New Jack City. He just forgot to put the J
in. Yeah, no.
All right, we are continuing our discussion this week on the Energon universe. And last time when we were looking at Transformers, we saw a mysterious soldier eject out of a jet plane moments before the horrible Decepticons smashed the plane and its pilot. And as he flew off, we saw the name tag with only the word Duke on it. So this week, we're taking a look at Duke. Knowing is half the battle from Joshua Williamson, art by Tom Riley and Skybound Entertainment. This collection that we're looking at came out in June of 2024.
Nice.
What do you think of Duke as a conspiracy nut?
It's tough for me because I am annoyed at how many times.
Oh man, we got to avoid the Noid.
Oh, shush. You get that. Okay. So you get the upstanding, let's say James T. Kirk in 1966, the upstanding, the company guy, the Starfleet. He's like a graduate of Starfleet Academy. He's like top of the line. He follows the rules except when he doesn't. Even when he breaks the rules, it's like, oh, well, Starfleet, I'm a guy, I'm a doing the thing. But by the time 2009 comes around, he has to be like a loner. He has to be anti-establishment. He has to be this cool guy who's like, oh, man, so yeah, I don't want to be a part of this stupid organization. I'm going to drive my dad's Corvette off a cliff. So in theory, that should annoy me. And that's how this book starts, with Duke being so obsessed after seeing Starscream that he disappears, kind of up his own butt. He becomes a conspiracy theorist, but more than that, he gets drummed out of the military and becomes this rogue agent, just kind of running around, interfacing with people who are like, we've seen them too.
Yeah.
We've seen these Transformers. And it works for me. I really, really like it. I especially like the references to what has come before. And there are a lot of them.
The references to what came before in the previous series, or what came before in the G.I. Joe universe?
In the G.I. Joe universe. So in issue 1, do you remember when he meets that nice old lady, Dr. Burkhart?
Yeah. And she's like, hey, here's a little device that will lead you to the power source.
Right. And so they're at one point looking at some stuff on her
Bulletin board.
drawing board. It's
Yeah.
the mass device from the 1986 show.
Oh, cool.
Dr. Burkhart is the MacGuffin of the very first G.I. Joe comic back in 82. She
Oh,
was
okay.
being held by Cobra, and the original 13-member G.I. Joe team had to break into Cobra Island and bust her out. And so there are lots of cool moments in here when Duke finally does make his way into Mars Industries, which we know is owned by Destro. He doesn't
Right.
fight Destro. He fights Mercer. Mercer, traditionally in the old continuity, was a G.I. Joe agent who used to be one of Cobra's guys. He used to be one of Cobra's foot soldiers, almost a shock trooper. And he eventually saw the error of his ways and joined G.I. Joe.
Ah, okay. Which is kind of the opposite of the Baroness, because she starts out as, caged animal, and she's like, fight with me, Duke, and we can make it out of here together. And we know from the G.I. Joe series that she's part of that team. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah. And they keep talking about Duke's little brother and how, oh, I would have expected this kind of insubordination from your little brother. Do you know who Duke's little brother is?
Don't say his name. Is it Martha?
No.
No. Okay.
Duke's little brother. Okay. G.I. Joe, the movie, came out in 86, and it had as much stunt casting as Transformers, the movie.
Yeah.
Don Johnson played the character Lieutenant Falcon.
Oh, cool.
Falcon
Okay.
is Duke's little brother.
I mean, okay. So here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. I know even less about G.I. Joe than I do about Transformers. And I know that's shocking, but anything that you say, Matthew, I'm just going to say, yes, if that's what you say. It's fascinating. And that's why I'm interested in getting in on this Interjohn universe, is because, hey, this is my chance to get on board from the very beginning, right? Which is something that I really couldn't do in 86 because my friend Mike just wanted to watch the GoBots animated show, and then we would watch Transformers. But then by the time G.I. Joe came on, I had to leave to go home to eat dinner. So I didn't really get to see G.I. Joe cartoons. Certainly didn't get to play with the toys. So if you tell me, some guy's name is Tugboat, or some other guy's name is Rock and Roll, or another guy's name is, I don't know, Speed Booger, then I'll be like, yeah, sure. Sounds like a code name to me. So all of this is fascinating, Matthew. So I'm glad you were getting a lot of.
Speed Booger was a Hanna-Barbera.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's the same voice as the guy that did Great Babe and Jabberjaw.
No. But yeah, there is a really great scene where Duke is on the run. He goes to ground and he ends up with his old friend Clutch.
So the thing is, I found this interesting because he's on the run, not because he's a conspiracy nut and they've drummed him out of the service, but it's because the gathering of the anonymous alphabet group is together, and Destro's sends in the Bat Soldiers and just wipes everybody out, and they make it look like Duke was the one that finally lost his mind and killed all these people. So that's why he's on the run. Everyone's like, no, this guy's a mass murderer. He's dangerous. He's finally cracked. Beware, everyone.
And he ends up finding his old friend Clutch. Clutch is one of my favorite of the original Joes, and Clutch is a New Jersey dirtbag. He's a piney, and he lives in a junkyard, but he's building stuff in his junkyard. And of course, they have to bust out of the junkyard. Do you see the Jeep that they take off in?
I don't have it open here in front of me, but I'll trust you.
That is the original 1982 configuration of the vamp. So I'm like,
the thing that I do remember, and especially when Duke does break into Mars and he's looking at all of the military gear that's being built, like the helicopters, the one-man helicopters, I'm like, I recognize those as the toys. And I believe the Cobra tank, I think it's the tank, is there. And I'm like, tank, okay, I recognize that as either from one of the episodes of G.I. Joe. I didn't say I didn't watch any G.I. Joe because people who are longtime listeners of the show know that one of my biggest things about G.I. Joe that I hated was exploding planes and then immediately parachutes open up. So I do recognize some of those things either from the toy line or from the cartoon series. So I did think that was kind of cool, but all these names and characters, no, I wouldn't know any of them from Adam.
And that's the best part, is you don't really need to, because everybody is
that's right.
introduced with context. Like in issue 3, we meet Major Blood.
Mhm.
And the first thing that I think when I see Major Blood is he doesn't have his eye patch.
Yeah, yet.
Well, fortunately, yeah, that's a yet. And that's really, for me, the part that Williamson and company do really well here. It sometimes when you have like a revamped launch boot, they do things. The new 52 was notorious for this. They do things exactly the opposite of the way they used to be to shock you. It's basically the old Vince McMahon swerve. Superboy's not, a cool kid. He's actually this horrible jerk face that everybody hates. And the problem with that kind of revamp is that the shock only works for a while. What Williamson does here with, like, for instance, the appearance of Rock and Roll and Stalker.
Mhm.
Rock and Roll and Stalker are after their friend because they think their friend killed a bunch of innocent people.
Yeah.
So when they start getting involved, it's from a different perspective, but you also look at it and you go, oh man, these guys make sense in this context. Seeing, Major Blood doing his Major Blood thing, and then maybe he does have an eye patch.
I mean, by the end, yeah. I mean, certainly there's a thing
Yeah.
that happens where you're like, so one of the things that I was really surprised with was when we read Transformers,
Mhm.
there was just an inordinate amount of violence, just the Decepticons just killing everything with glee. And I just, it was kind of turned off. In Duke, knowing it's half the battle, there is violence. There are people that get shot, but it is not over the it's by the same person, Joshua Williamson, and yet the level of over the top violence is not there. I was really surprised at that.
I'm kind of not. And I think the reason for it, we talked about it last week, that question of scale.
Yeah.
Showing that the Autobots, even Prime accidentally kills a deer. The Autobots and the Decepticons are these enormous giant robots. And Starscream is pure evil. Starscream is chaos. He smashes people. He laughs. He crushes them to death. There's a lot of that going around. This is a story kind of from the opposite perspective. This is the small people in a world where they're looking up, and these
No, but they're
giant
still
robots
soldiers, and soldiers
Yeah.
kill each other. And so when you talk about
But
Baron
they
Blood
don't
getting shot
kill-
in the head,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, this could have been much more graphic. And in Transformers, they're squishing humans like jelly. Here, Baron Blood gets shot, and you're like, did they just, headshot this guy? Of course, it's all in silhouette so that you can get to the reveal that he's like, the Baron has shot my ear off, or whatever that happened.
He shot me right in the eye.
Yeah, and so then you're like,
Right.
okay, well, that explains that. But it's not that over the top,
Yeah.
Full Metal Jacket type violence where somebody's just getting blown away in high detail on panel.
And I feel like that's intentional because, yes, soldiers do kill each other. But I also feel like soldiers, especially fictional soldiers, are not meant to kill indiscriminately, kill at random. And even that point where Major Blood takes what looks like a fatal headshot, it's actually the Baroness, who is at that point an escaped prisoner who's about to turn on Duke, or at least it seems like she's about to turn on Duke, who shoots Blood in the head.
Yeah.
Had that been Stalker shooting her in the head, I think I would have had an issue. Like, it's when Rock and Roll and Stalker actually attack Clutch and Duke.
Well, but even when the bats come in and kill everybody in the conspiracy group, it's not over the top.
No. And when they attack, they're attacking with high caliber weapons, but they're also not wiping people out. They're trying to take Duke into custody. So, he takes the sniper rifle and he blows the tires out of the Jeep. And Rock and Roll is laying down cover fire. He's not like opening up on people. Probably the closest we get is when the police, who are actually clearly Cobra troopers, find Duke and just open up a can of just endless.
Yeah.
He should be dead, honestly. The way that's drawn, there's just a hail of gunfire. It is amazing that Duke is not absolutely ventilated. But
I mean, he does get pierced pretty good, so that does happen. But It's
These
very
are
much
human
downplayed.
characters.
Yeah, no, but
These
I'm
are
just
meant
saying
to
that the violence is downplayed, and I don't think it has anything to do with humans and
Mhm.
and robots. I really think that maybe there was a little conversation where someone said a little bit over the top. Maybe you guys should tone it down when you get into the Duke and GI Joe stuff. Now, again, when we get
Mhm.
into Destro and I know Destro for sure, and I think Scarlet. I think the
Mhm.
violence, if I remember correctly, does kind of ramp back up a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I was just really surprised in that.
I think it's
And I
it's the
think for
nature of the
people,
G.I. Joe property rather than
yeah,
any
but
editorial thing for me.
it's also both of those. Everything is here owned by Hasbro, right? So that's the other thing that's interesting. And here, we'll get to some Transformers comments in a moment. But for people that are like, "Oof, if the description of last week about Transformers put me off," then I think
Mhm.
maybe the discussion here of the violence is really toned down might bring people back to go and pick up Duke and the GI Joe series.
Mhm.
So just kind of keep that in mind. The one
Mhm.
thing that I was surprised in was this story starts off very slow, a slower pace, even when he's on the run and being hunted. And then in just
Mhm.
like a matter of, this is 6 issues, I think, just in the matter of
5.
the last 3 or yeah, okay, then the last 2 issues, everything just ramps up and comes to a conclusion very, very quickly.
Yeah.
I
And
was surprised by that the pacing is a little weird in this book.
it feels like, and if I had read this an issue at a time, I would have my standard complaint because I think just today I read issue 3 of a 6-issue arc, and there is that point, where it's time for the commercial break. This collection, these 5 issues together, feel like one action movie from top to bottom.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it works
Broken
great
out
together.
into 5 individual chapters, I feel like I would have been so mad. I would have been so mad if I tried to read this an
I don't
issue
know
at
if I would have been that in an issue to issue. I was just, I'm getting to the end of issue 2 or the middle of issue 3 and I'm like, wow, the way this story is going, how do they wrap this up? Or maybe it's like to be continued in this next book. I was really
Mhm.
expecting something like that and then it's just like boom boom boom, we're done. And I was like, "Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting." But yeah, I
And
enjoyed this. I enjoyed this as is in a trade, and that's probably how I would suggest people read it is all at once. It's a very quick
and
read.
the first comic I ever bought was Shogun Warriors #1 in '79. The
Mhm.
first comic I sought out and the book that started me reading comics was G.I. Joe #1 in '82. And I don't know that I would say that I'm super protective. I don't feel like I'm gatekeepery about GI Joe. But GI Joe is one of my touchstones. It's one of the fictional universes that I always try to keep a finger in and see what's going on,
Uh-huh.
just see what's going on with
Well,
the crazy crazies. But
so
this relaunch really works for me, and I feel like it shouldn't
but
because
that
it
was
does
one
a
of your
lot of the things
concerns.
that make me complain. Yeah,
So, we
it's
were talking in either the pre-show or before I started recording pre-show, or maybe it was one of the other shows we were about to record, and we were just talking,
Mhm.
where you kind of expressed a concern. I didn't want this to turn into a greatest hits of Larry Hama,
Right.
and it
And
doesn't seem to be that way, though.
it doesn't. And the changes that it makes, first of all, are strategic and they're made to kind of build the universe in a way that works for me a lot better than I don't know if you remember. You probably do remember because you're Steven. But do you remember when, what was it, a few years ago, IDW was doing that shared Hasbro universe?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
ROM,
yeah.
Transformers, everything
It's all
was
in there.
tied up.
My Little Pony, Ghostbusters, they're all
Yeah.
part of the same thing. Yeah.
It was all tied in together, but it was tied in together after the fact. So the books had already, begun and gone, some of them for, dozens, in one case, hundreds of issues. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's all tied together. And here's ROM. This starts from a point, there is no G.I. Joe until like the last pages. And even then, it's just the seeds of G.I. Joe in the last
Right.
pages of issue 5.
Right. Right.
And that really works for me because
Mhm.
it kind of takes that nonsensical view that you always have to have that central Tom Cruise or Channing Tatum figure. You have to have somebody at the center who's like, yeah, I'm a rebel Dottie. That's what I do.
Well,
You have
well,
that.
that's
that
what I think
moment.
is, and again, that's why I think that's the reason why I like getting into this
Mhm.
whole Energon universe, because I'm getting into it on the ground floor. I'm not jumping into, hey, these Transformers have landed on Earth. Smash cut to G.I. Joe. We've been a secret organization for 65 years. We are fighting
Right.
Cobra. And you're just expected to know everything that's going on. No, the nice thing that I like about, especially the G.I. Joe series, because I did read Cobra Commander and Destro when they came out, is that you are building these things up so you understand who these characters are, what their motivations are, and kind of their personalities or what drives them as each issue or as each of these individuals lead us up to the G.I. Joe launch, or as Void Rivals leads us into Transformers. We are seeing these things build, and you're just not dumped into episode 1 of the animated series, and the whole universe has been built and been running since the Korean War.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why I like that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that is something that many comic books and honestly movies and television shows neglect. And part of it is the effect of, that Marvel Comics, here's the Avengers and it made $11 billion thing.
Mm-hmm.
They forget that it was 5 years of movies building to that point.
Yeah, yeah.
And so seeing this start the way it did, especially starting with that Void Rivals, and here's this really way out science fiction story. And it turns out that science fiction story is literally the ground floor of this new shared universe. And so we see Duke, and then we see the Transformers arrive, and Duke comes out of that. G.I. Joe is literally being formed partly because of the effect that the Transformers have on the world. And the energon that the Transformers use is actually what's going to make Destro a very, very rich and very evil man. And so
and
all of these things are building in a way that it's not, oh yeah, well, you have to remember, Stephen, back in 84, they revealed what energon was. They're not expecting you to know. They're telling you.
And that's what I
this
like.
Is what energon is, and that's what's cool. And I love that.
And I think the other thing that I like is each of these traits that we've read is like, hey, here's the one panel that's going to tie into to our next series. This one you're thinking it's going to be Destro and Mars, and it's not. It's the last pages of the book where you reveal a certain Transformer in the mountains, which is the big reveal in Cobra Commander, which is the next one in the series that we read next week. And so that's I think that's really kind of cool too. So I guess bottom line for me, if you don't know anything about Transformers or G.I. Joe, and you've been reading Void Rivals, and then you got the Transformers based on our recommendation, I think you might as well just roll into Duke. The art is great. Tom Riley does a great job. I think his military weapons look really good. I think his clean-cut Duke and his, hey man, I'm dropped out of society and I'm going to go on to message boards, Duke, are very cool looking. I like how he draws the Baroness, and the Baroness is not, and again, don't get me wrong, I like J. Scott Campbell, and I like J. Scott Campbell when he draws the Baroness, but the Baroness is drawn a little bit differently. I like that we get to see, what's his name? Major Blood. I like that we get to see Destro, and they look really good in the hands of Tom Riley. So I say go all in and get Duke as well, because once you read this, you'll have an understanding of where G.I. Joe is coming from. And of course, that means knowing is half the battle. Final thoughts from you, Matthew?
So here's the deal. Back in 1985, and I can still quote it in my head, Duke's file card introduced him as a master sergeant. So he's an E8 grade, and they say, why is he not an officer? And Duke says, the officer survives to take the blame. I'd rather be the guy in the field leading the risk and taking the risk with people.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what this does. Larry Hama wrote that file card 40 years ago.
It's in the book. It's in the book. He says that Duke is like, I'd rather be in the field with the soldiers instead of, whatever you say.
Yep, exactly. And he has the Master Sergeant insignia in that opening screen. And that's the point where my brain went, oh, they did their homework. And all of the changes and all of the alterations and all of the things that you could go, this is not canonically. The Devil's Due production revamp of G.I. Joe made me angry back in 2005. This one is so exciting. It is so well done, so well conceived and put together. And I feel like even if you're an old person like me and you think, oh, is this going to be true to my G.I. Joe? This is not your father's G.I. Joe. But let me tell you, as someone who's probably the same age as your father, this is the beginning of what I feel like could be really good G.I. Joe. I say this is a rush right out in a buying frenzy, especially if you're a G.I. Joe fan.
Does
And if you
this?
know my takes on revamps, you know
Yeah, I
that
was
may
going to
be a
ask. I think everybody knows your feelings on the Ultimate Universe
Mhm,
and Absolute DC and all of these
mhm.
things. How does this feel right now to you? Is this a new 52, or is this something that is completely different and is on the right track?
You remember how we felt in that first year after the crisis in '87,
Yes.
where everything was cool and exciting and they were making good decisions and they were giving us stuff that made sense and it was consecutively making sense and it was building a world that
Hmm.
played with everything that we knew but
Hmm.
also made it
Hmm.
feel different and it was exciting. It's that.
Okay.
Now, can they keep it going? Because, I mean, DC lost it by 87, 88. I hope that they can. So far, I'm just like, this is the book that I've liked the best. And I haven't disliked anything in the Void Rivals Energon universe. So,
All right. Very cool. All right. A little bit of feedback from our conversation about the Transformers last week. Megatron Stu says the Transformers discussion was likewise really interesting. Your comment on the violence echoed my own. It's why I'm reluctant to share it with my son yet, as he will be a bit shocked by the level of violence and cruelty by the Decepticons. I like the
mm,
fact that DWJ brought in some of the lesser bots. Cliff Jumper
mm,
was my first ever Transformers toy as a kid, so I feel an affinity for him, and that is approaching Optimus. Oh, and that he's approaching Optimus in a very different way. I really enjoyed this first volume and will read the next as well. Mighty King Cobra, Matthew, I'm a lifelong Transformers fan, but I do have some concerns about making all the villains brutal monsters, like Rodrigo mentioned. However, I'm interested to see where it goes. Another cracking listen. Thank you, everyone.
mm. Lagnus actually said, I have very, very little connection with the Transformers. Most of the lore I learned from Steven a while back. So if you learn Transformers from Steven, yeah. Okay. So, like
Congratulations.
this was like, I did read a G.I. Joe Action Force crossover with Transformers in the '80s. It was probably made in England. Yes, it was. Because G.I. Joe versus Transformers in the United States made some changes to continuity that did not make it to the Action Force reprints. And so things that happened in that book happened in the British Transformers book, the UK Transformers separately. So yes, Action Force Transformers is a unique UK book. I do recommend looking it up. Blagness says, listening to this, I'm not going to read it. And with no connection to the franchise, it won't drag me in. But still, since he does have a history with G.I. Joe, Lagnus is looking forward to the G.I. Joe side. So hopefully, Lagnus, you read this before the episode, did your homework so that you were ready to roll today.
There you go. All right, everybody, that wraps it up for this issue. Thank you so much for listening. If you found value in the show, we would love for you to join us on our Patreon, where you can find even more fun, including the Major Spoilers Podcast pre-show. Find out more at patreon.com/major spoilers. Next week on the Major Spoilers Podcast, Matthew Rosenberg stops by to talk about his new miniseries, We're Taking You All Down With Us. And we continue our look at the Energon universe as we peek behind the cover of Cobra Commander. Why? Because we know that you love comics. We do too. We will talk with you soon.
If I had the X-ray vision of a Superman, I could save a few bucks and stand around and read through the covers of the comics on the stand. But although every other page would be backwards, I suppose I could still read the evens and the odds. Well, I don't know. Guess I haven't thought this all the way through. Plus, as soon as the comic book store guy knew, he kicked my butt out on the corner. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Think about a better way. If I was hulking green or gray, I could just bust through that brick wall, take their comic books away. But then the little meat would deal with all the tanks and bombs and guns. Have you ever tried to read a series with all that going on? Guess I need to rethink this plan. How would I back and board my comics with such huge hands? Guess I already told ya. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. If I'm Stark Raven, rich like a man of iron, I might not be surprised to find that I might actually have the hard code to follow an entire storyline. But would I really even need to read up on all those escapades? I mean, who needs such distractions when your sister's such a babe? But the downside is such a beast. Being shot up in a fun, be in the Middle East with a gang sign throwing soldier. What a major spoiler. What a major spoiler. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What a major spoiler. Whoa, 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 whoa. What a major spoiler.
This podcast is copyright 2025 by Major Spoilers Entertainment, LLC.